Larry Smarr is an astrophysicist turned computer scientist. He's a measured man living a very measured life. Larry loves his data, especially data about his own bodily functions. He was there at the start of the internet and helped convince the US government to link up the universities so researchers could use the fastest computers in America. Today, Larry's the founding director of the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology. Larry has applied his love of science and scientific inquiry to his own quest to live a long, healthy life. And in doing so, he may just be showing us what healthcare in the future will look like.
Well, I moved from having spent 20 years in the Midwest in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, at the University of Illinois, to University of California, San Diego in La Jolla. And it was sort of like going from Mars to Venus. The activity levels, the body shapes, everything were just totally different. And I have to say I was looking more like what the average American looks like these days, which is quite overweight, out of shape, not taking care of themselves. Actually, I might say, I don't know about New Zealand, but it's certainly the average Australian, which has joined the United States in the obesity epidemic. And so people started saying, well, what are you doing for exercise? Have you got a trainer? What, on things that I hadn't thought about in 20 or 30 years, since I had exercised when I was young. So I started looking into this and also realizing pretty quickly that if you want to get in shape, exercise is about 20% of the effort, and 80% is nutrition and changing your lifestyle. So I started reading lots of books on, diet and weight loss and things like that, none of which were very fulfilling to me until I came across Barry Sears, who's a PhD biochemist, who wrote the books on the Zone diet. And it's not a diet; it's really a science-based explanation of how your body works. And so as I began to understand about the glucose-insulin cycle and how omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, drive inflammation or anti-inflammation in your blood, I began to say, well, gosh, this is pretty simple. You've got a human body. It is a biochemical machine. You can understand what makes it run well, and you can understand, therefore, what you ought to put into it. And from that, you can derive a good nutritional program, both what you eat and how much of it you eat. And also you can understand what different kinds of exercises are necessary to make a healthy, well-functioning body. And so I set out to make those changes.
And, I mean, I'm with you so far, and that all sounds, like a good plan. But the next stage is starting to self-monitor and starting to have everything, not only that you're excreting, but that's happening in your body, analysed and monitored on a pretty regular basis. That takes a little bit of a leap, I guess, for most people, doesn't it? It's easy to read something and do it, but to actually then go the next stage and start to measure, which is what you've essentially done.
Right. Well, I'm a lifetime scientist, and I spent 25 years doing relativistic astrophysics and came to understand that if you want to know how a complex dynamic system behaves, you have to make measurements of the key variables. And instead of doing magnetic fields and temperatures and things like that you would do with things in the universe, you have to look and say, well, okay, there must be some key biomarkers in the body, in the bloodstream, or in your stool. The saliva, for instance, you can use to get your genetic code. And these are the things that basically define you as an individual human being and the state of your body and its time rate of change. And the one thing we've learned since Sir Isaac Newton is many hundreds of years ago is if you want to understand the future state of a system, you must know its current state and how it's changing in time and how the fundamental variables are changing in time.
So what are you measuring today, Larry? I mean, how do you, in terms of mapping that system today, what do you measure?
About 100 different variables in my blood. These are broken out into things like a lot of people do: cholesterol sector, liver enzymes, kidney function, white and red blood cell counts, and as you begin to do this, you find most of them are more or less within the range you'd expect. But I found one in my blood completely surprising to me. In fact, I didn't expect to find this result at all, that I had a very high level of chronic inflammation. And yet my diet, the whole point to the Zone diet is it's an anti-inflammation nutritional program. And so I figured, having done that for, say, 5 years, and by now we're 2007, 2008, I should have absolutely zero inflammation. And instead, I had 5 times the upper limit, then 10 times, then 15 times, and eventually 30 times. And I just couldn't understand this. So I figured that there had to be some point source of that inflammation in my body, and I set out to find out what it was.
Did you have a conversation with your GP, with your doctor? Was that the sort of starting point?
Well, I had many conversations with doctors, and I went through a fair number of them because most of them didn't believe that I should be doing what I was doing.
So hold on, you're doing your own blood tests here. You've identified that there's an anomaly. You've got this inflammation marker is 30 times the normal. You're knocking on the door of a doctor. He's sat there going, is this guy a hypochondriac or a Fruit Loop? What's going on here? I mean, were they looking at you oddly?
Yes, and telling me I shouldn't be doing it and that it was academic. Now, there were some good doctors who understood that, this might be the way things are done in the future. But, in defense of doctors, the way medicine is practiced and is funded is that you must do best practices. And best practices mean something that's been tried tens of thousands of times and has been written up in the medical literature. In other words, it's things from the past. And my institute, the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology here at the University of California, San Diego and University of California, Irvine, we live in the future. We try to understand where technology is going to take us and then say, well, okay, let's live like that and see how things will change. And so I think in defense of the doctors, there really wasn't much of a way they could deal with this, even though this is what's going to eventually be the medicine of the future.
Although, isn't that slightly problematic, living in the future? At the end of the day, life is finite. We're all going to die. And as an end point, when you start with this, gazing into the future, no one's normal. We're always going to find an anomaly. So, I'm going to have an issue. You're going to have, we're all going to go somehow. And I guess the way that manifests, if we can identify that today, we got to live opposed to measure and worry about the future. Healthy is not just something physical, is it? It's mental. It's a state of mind.
Well, so, there's 2 ways to go from where you are today at whatever age that happens to be.
45.
When you die.
Yep.
Yeah, well, so say you've got another 30, 40, 45 years ahead of you, and, you can be, like your car, you can do preventive maintenance and keep it in a very tip-top running condition right up until the day you die. Or you can start, as most people do, a slow decline because they don't want to know what's going on. They don't want to correct it. They don't want to know. And as a result, if you didn't ever do any preventive maintenance to your car, you never changed the oil, you never took it in for a checkup, it would do just like that. It would gradually get worse and worse, and eventually it would die much earlier than it would need to.
But how much time every day are you spending sort of self-monitoring? How much time are you looking at data?
It's because of the advent of commercial consumer electronics, very little. So at night, I spend about 10 seconds putting on my Zeo headband that measures my sleep state every 30 seconds all night long. And when I get up in the morning, I look over at my Zeo clock, and it shows me the graph of exactly how my sleep developed during the evening. And it records it automatically on a little chip. And I take my headband off, put it back on, and it charges. And altogether, I've maybe used 30 seconds. And I put on my Fitbit, as soon as I get up, and it starts measuring my steps all day long. And in the evening, I take it and set it on my computer, and it reads all the data into the computer and up in the cloud. And I spend maybe 30 seconds on that. On the other hand, I now have tracked 24/7 the major state of my body during sleep and awake.
But what about the bloods and the stools, arm balls, and all the other sort of,
Well, to take a stool sample, I would say, maybe 5 minutes, and then you take it down to the FedEx, and a week or two later, you get an email, and you've got all the data.
Why are you looking at your stool? What's that telling you?
Well, you in particular, as any human being, your human cells are 1/10 of the cells in your body. 90% of the cells in your body are the microbes in your gut, on your skin, in your mouth, and so they have 100 times as many genes that make proteins and therefore perform services for your body that your human DNA has. And so, to first order, you're a pile of microbes with 10% human cells. And yet all of medicine to this date has just looked at the human cells, only 10% of who you are. So naturally, they don't understand a lot about a lot of diseases.
So you're getting your bacteria, you're getting your sort of gut flora mapped, are you?
Yeah, exactly. Half by weight, half of stool by dry weight is bacteria. And those bacteria all have DNA. And so I'm now getting it sequenced so that I know exactly who's in there and whether I'm in healthy mode or not, which I'm not. And then, therefore, what do I have to do to change it? And you can change it by diet, by probiotics, by lots of different techniques. But, remember, your human cells are only 10% of who you are. And if your microbes aren't healthy, you're not healthy.
And we never actually finished the story about your inflammation marker, this 30% or 30 times increase in that marker that showed that your body was undergoing some sort of massive inflammation.
Yeah, so what happened is to figure out what I had a hunch that it might be related to my colon because I'd had problems with my colon on and off during my life. And sure enough, when I looked at the stool sample, one of the things that does besides the bacteria is it gives your colon is your largest immune organ in your body. Most of your immune cells are in your colon. And so there's a number of biomarkers that tell you whether there's inflammation there. And the one I ended up with was supposed to be less than 7, and I ended up being over 900, 128 times the upper limit. And so then I had colonoscopy and I had MRI, and I found out there was 6 inches of my colon that was highly inflamed. And these biomarkers indicated that against all odds, I had late onset inflammatory bowel disease. And that's a chronic incurable disease. It's an autoimmune disease. Now, there are 80 autoimmune diseases that the National Institutes of Health defines. And 10% at least of Americans have an autoimmune disease. And most of those autoimmune diseases are probably caused by problems in your gut microbes coupled with specific changes that you might have, say, compared to me, in your genome, in your human genome. And so the only way we're going to understand these diseases is by genetically sequencing the human and genetically sequencing the microbes that live on us and in us, and then understanding if they're different than they might be in, say, quote-unquote, healthy people.
And we've done the human bit, haven't we? And that was going to be, I guess, sort of crossing the Rubicon when it came to sort of personal health, and we haven't really seen that. And so this is a theme that I keep hearing, that our largest organ is our gut. We have to manage we have two genomes. We have our own personal genome. We have the genome of our microbiome that we have to manage, and we have to manage this relationship. Is technology, we've seen Moore's law happen, and this is sort of transistors doubling, things getting faster, everything getting cheaper, handsets, smartphones, technologies becoming ubiquitous. Is this what sort of is going to happen with health? Is that we're starting to see Moore's law colliding with health? We've seen it disrupt entertainment, publishing, so many other industries. Is this sort of the new frontier, that understanding our...
You couldn't have said it better. What we are entering is the era of the digital transformation of medicine, or as Eric Topol in his new book calls it, the creative destruction of medicine as we knew it for centuries. And in its place will be a data-rich, science-based medicine, and a change from our central paradigm of sickness and maintaining chronically sick people to wellness and avoiding becoming chronically sick by altering our behavior. And the thing that is most amazing is in the last 12 years, the cost of sequencing a human genome or the microbial genome has fallen by 1 million-fold. Now, I don't think any other time in human history where we've seen a 1 million times reduction in cost of something that is central to your being as a human person, namely your genetics. And so this means that we're now entering, the reason you haven't seen a big payoff in health from the human genome is it's just now entering the point that it's cheap enough, a few $1,000s per person, to do your whole human genome. Well, we need hundreds of thousands or millions of people's full genomes to understand how we differ from each other. The same thing goes with our gut microbes, and you probably saw in June a whole set of news articles about these scientific papers that came out on the human microbiome, the results of 5 years of research, and for the first time defining the human variants and healthy people of our microbial friends in our skin, our colon, and so forth. And so we're right at the beginning of this scientific revolution. And over the next 10 years, you're going to see just dramatic change as this disruptive technology, as you say, collides with the classic field of medicine.
It's almost like, going to the doctor and having, I maybe go once a year for what I call a warrant of fitness appointment, where I go in there and, there are various things done to me and I give a bit of blood and, I don't tend to hear from the doctor. It's almost like that's a low definition medical examination, and what we're going to see in the future is this sort of HD version of medicine, which is going to be so much more about the future.
You're absolutely correct. That's exactly where we're going. I mean, we've seen so many fields go from data poor to data rich. If you think about what happened in the entertainment industry, as you mentioned, when the bits were all locked up in analog medium like plastic CDs, or DVDs or whatever. But once those bits were really liberated and file sharing set up, there was just this incredible disruption of the entertainment. People like Steve Jobs understood it because it was like digital. And so he invented iTunes and the iPod and iPhones and made himself another $1 billion and changed everything. This is the kind of thing we expect to see in medicine over the next 10 or 15 years. But
how is medicine as an entity going to change from being sort of community-based to being individually based? That is a huge change in not only in thinking but in economics. I mean, just trying to deliver solutions one-to-one that's just a different beast.
Well, it is, but we've been here and we've seen this movie before, and that's in our automobiles. Back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, we knew when to take our car in, our individual car, when smoke came out from under the hood. And you heard this large knocking, in a car, and you go in the garage, and they say, "Oh, this is going to cost you. You burned out the rings." Now, the world is completely different in that we have 50 to 100 computer chips, sensors, and actuators in each car. You go in for preventive readouts every, say, 10 or 20,000 miles. They read this all out. They compare it with the population of all the other cars of your make and year. And if that spark plug or brakes or whatever is out of line, they have a little manual that says, take this module out, put this module in. Several 100,000 miles later, your car is running as well as the day you bought it. That is yet to happen to the way we do our bodies. But if you think about the revolution that took place in all the network dealerships, and there's nobody in a garage anymore that knows how engines work. They just know how to read the data out and then read the manual as to what to fix. And so that completely changed that industry.
Yeah, I've got to say, I like. Part of me likes the sound of this future, but part of me is concerned that life can be pretty anxious at the best of times. When you've got
Sure.
DVDs to get back on time to the rental store, and you've got eggs to collect from the chickens down the garden and a bit of garden. There are things that occupy, and I can't think that having all of this data coming in of changes of the way we're functioning of our bodies, it's going to send some people. It's going to make them ill.
Well, every one of those people probably drives a car. They are completely unaware of the vast amount of data that their car is generating every second. They never see it. Experts see it, and experts decide what to do to keep your car running, and you're just happy your car is running. So I don't expect individual citizens to end up having to look at this data and figure it out the way I did. I'm doing it because I'm a scientist. I'm working on my own body because that's a long tradition in medicine of trying to figure out how to do new things. But eventually this is all going to be in software. It's all going to be done invisibly to you. And there will be suggestions from your computer that, the way you're eating, the way you're exercising could use a little improvement. And you'd feel a lot better if you did. And there's going to be a lot of social networks that you're going to be able to share these ideas with, and how's it going with you, and I did this many steps today, what about you? And so I think it's going to actually be quite natural.
Oh, I can't wait for those online stool charts. Larry Smarr, founding director of the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology.